Emily Turner was the kind of student every professor dreams of teaching. At just 22 years old, she was already making waves in her law program at one of the most prestigious universities in the country. Her academic record was flawless, with high marks in every class, and she had an impeccable reputation among her peers. Emily was driven, ambitious, and laser-focused on her goal of becoming a top-tier lawyer. She had an air of quiet confidence, always prepared and meticulous in her studies, making her stand out even in a sea of exceptional students. Dr. Thomas West, on the other hand, was a seasoned professor in his mid-40s, known for his intellectual rigor and often considered one of the brightest minds in the university's law department. He wasn't one to mince words in the classroom and was known for his challenging lectures that left students both awestruck and intimidated. He commanded respect, not just for his knowledge, but for the air of authority he carried. Over the years, Dr. West had earned the admiration of both students and faculty, cementing his reputation as one of the most respected and sought-after professors. From the moment Dr. West noticed Emily, he could see her potential. Unlike some students who would merely attend class and passively take notes, Emily was engaged, always eager to dive deeper into complex legal theories and cases. She had a rare talent for understanding intricate nuances and applying them in ways that left others in the class in awe. Dr. West found himself captivated by her mind. As a professor who prided himself on intellectual stimulation, he saw in Emily a student who could one day rival even the most accomplished lawyers. It didn't take long for Dr. West to begin mentoring Emily personally, offering guidance on her academic path. At first, it was nothing more than extended office hours where they discussed papers, debated legal principles, and explored complex issues of jurisprudence. Emily, for her part, was grateful for the attention. She respected Dr. West immensely, not just for his vast knowledge, but for his experience in the field. His insight helped sharpen her critical thinking and allowed her to excel even further in her studies. To her, this mentorship was an opportunity to learn from the best, and she soaked in every word he said. As time passed, their professional relationship began to take on a more personal tone. Emily would seek Dr. West's advice on career choices, life decisions, and the future she hoped to build. Their discussions often ran late into the evening, long after others had left the campus. They would share a coffee in the faculty lounge, sometimes talking about law, other times about personal dreams and desires. Emily found herself drawn to Dr. West in ways she didn't fully understand at first. He was charismatic, worldly, and commanding in a way that was both intimidating and magnetic. There was a warmth to him, a subtle charm that made her feel special and seen. Soon their conversations began to shift in nature, the line between academic respect and personal attraction blurring. Emily was aware of the rumors circulating among other students about the increasing closeness between her and Dr. West, but she pushed them aside. She told herself that her admiration for him was purely intellectual, but in truth, there was something more. Something unspoken that neither of them could deny. It wasn't long before the mentorship turned into something far more dangerous. What began as a deep admiration for his intellect slowly morphed into a dangerous, forbidden attraction that neither of them could control. As Emily's admiration for Dr. West grew, so did the power dynamic between them. He too seemed to find himself captivated by her, though whether it was by her beauty, her mind, or perhaps the forbidden nature of their relationship was unclear. Emily was a star in his eyes, someone who embodied all the potential he had once dreamed of in his younger years. But as the days went on, the boundaries of their professional relationship continued to blur, and the whispers around campus grew louder. What had started as a teacher-student connection was quickly evolving into something neither could have predicted. And as the emotional intensity between them deepened, so did the risk of their secret being discovered. The first time the affair truly began, it happened after a late-night seminar on legal ethics. Emily had always been the type of student who was genuinely interested in the material, not just because she wanted to ace the exams, but because she wanted to understand the core principles of the law. Dr. West had noticed this about her. She wasn't just a brilliant student, she was someone who actually cared about the intricacies of justice and the human side of the law. That evening, after the seminar, Emily approached him with questions about a paper she was working on, questions that had been haunting her for days. She didn't expect much beyond the usual academic feedback, but as they talked in the near-empty building, something shifted. Dr. West invited her to his office to discuss her paper further. At first, it seemed like any other academic meeting, quiet, professional, and focused. But as the conversation went on, something changed in the air. There was an electricity between them, a palpable tension neither could ignore. Emily found herself more aware of him than she had ever been before. He was intelligent, certainly, but there was something else about him, something magnetic, a presence that seemed to pull her in. His eyes, always intense when he spoke, made her feel as if she were the only person in the world that mattered at that moment. As the evening wore on, their conversation drifted from the paper to other topics. Her ambitions, his experiences as a young lawyer, the frustrations of academia. Emily listened intently, hanging on every word. Dr. West, too, seemed captivated by her. She was more than just a student to him. She was someone who shared his intellectual curiosity, someone who challenged him in ways few others did. He found her not only engaging but inspiring, something rare in a world of students who often followed the prescribed path without questioning it. There was an undeniable connection growing between them, one neither could have anticipated. The meeting ended later than either expected, but as they parted ways, there was a lingering sense that something had changed. Both felt it, though neither dared speak of it. Emily was confused. She had always admired him for his intellect, but now she was seeing him in a different light. Dr. West, too, found himself thinking of her more than he should have. The attraction was subtle at first, but it grew stronger with each passing day. It wasn't long before they met again, this time under less formal circumstances. Dr. West emailed Emily asking if she'd like to continue their conversation over coffee. She hesitated for a moment, but the thought of seeing him again, of hearing his thoughts, was too tempting to resist. What started as an innocent coffee chat soon spiraled into something more. They talked about everything, about the things that frustrated them, the dreams they had for the future, their personal lives, their fears. The line between student and professor began to blur in a way neither could deny. Emily had come to admire him so deeply, not just for his intellect, but for his confidence, the way he carried himself. It was impossible for her to ignore how drawn she was to him. By the time their third meeting rolled around, the tension had reached its peak. They were alone in his office, the university quiet around them. The conversation was no longer about law or politics, but about something far more personal. There was a moment, brief but undeniable, when their eyes locked, and without a word, they both understood what was happening. Neither of them could step back from it now. The chemistry was too intense, too real to ignore any longer. It was no longer about mentorship or admiration. It was about desire, about two people caught up in something dangerous and thrilling. In that moment, Dr. West reached out and touched her arm, a gesture that seemed innocent but sent a rush of electricity through both of them. And before either of them could fully understand what was happening, the kiss followed, a slow, tentative meeting of lips that, once it happened, seemed impossible to stop. What started as a spark had ignited into a flame neither of them was prepared to put out. The affair had begun. As the affair between Emily and Dr. West continued, a complex web of lies began to form around them. At first, it was easy to keep their secret. They were both skilled at maintaining appearances, with Emily excelling in her studies and Dr. West continuing to be a respected professor. But the thrill of secrecy soon began to fade, replaced by the weight of deception that both of them struggled to manage. Emily's friends noticed the subtle changes in her behavior. She became more withdrawn, less engaged in group activities, and her once spotless academic record began to show signs of strain. Her grades, though still good, weren't as perfect as before. She seemed distracted in class, often lost in thought, and her usual sharp focus was now clouded. Emily was spending more time with Dr. West than with her friends. and though she tried to cover it up, they could sense that something was off. To hide the affair, Emily told her friends that she was working late on her thesis or preparing for special projects with Dr. West. They accepted these explanations, assuming she was just being overly ambitious. After all, it was Emily, the perfect student. They had no reason to suspect anything more. But as the days passed, it became harder for Emily to maintain the facade. She was living a double life, pretending everything was normal, while her emotions were becoming more and more tangled. She was deeply in love with Dr. West, but the knowledge that their relationship was a lie, a secret they could never share with the world, gnawed at her. Dr. West, too, was struggling with the lies he was telling. He continued to portray himself as the committed family man, respected by his colleagues and beloved by his wife. Emily had no idea, but his marriage was far from perfect. His wife, Sarah, had been suspicious of his behavior for some time. Dr. West had always been a man of secrets, secret meetings, secret phone calls, late nights at the office. But Emily's presence in his life was the biggest secret of all. At home, he was distant, his mind always preoccupied. But when he was with Emily, he felt alive in a way he hadn't in years. The affair gave him a rush, a sense of excitement he couldn't find anywhere else. But the lies didn't stop there. Dr. West had convinced himself that his affair with Emily was just a temporary lapse in judgment, something that wouldn't affect his career or family. He believed he could keep it all hidden, that his professional reputation was too solid to be shaken by a personal misstep. Emily, however, was beginning to believe that their relationship could be more than just an affair. It could be the start of something real. She imagined a future with him, one where they could be open about their love, free from the secrecy and shame. She was so consumed by this idea that she began to push for more, not understanding the danger of pressing Dr. West for promises he couldn't give. Meanwhile, Sarah, Dr. West's wife, had started to put the pieces together. She wasn't entirely sure what was going on, but something about her husband's behavior was off. She had noticed the long hours, the texts, the strange looks. Her suspicions grew stronger with each passing week. She had always known that Dr. West was an ambitious man, but she hadn't imagined that his ambition would extend to something like this. Yet, no matter how much she suspected, she couldn't prove anything, until one day she came across an email that sent her heart into a spiral. It was addressed to Emily. The realization hit her like a punch to the stomach. The affair was real. Her husband had betrayed her, and the woman involved was someone she knew by name, someone who was admired by everyone around her, the perfect student, the last person she would have ever suspected. Now, with the lies stretching further and further, the tangled web that Emily and Dr. West had woven began to unravel. The secrecy couldn't hold much longer. The pressure was building, and the consequences of their affair were looming larger than either could have anticipated. As Emily's desperation grew and Dr. West's guilt mounted, both were caught in a dangerous game of deceit, one that neither would be able to escape without consequences. The lies were already beginning to crack, and soon the truth would come crashing down. The night of the murder unfolded in ways neither Emily nor Dr. West could have predicted. By then, their affair had spiraled into a chaotic mix of desire, guilt, and frustration. Emily was no longer the confident student who had walked into Dr. West's office months ago. She was a woman consumed by her emotions, obsessed with the idea that she and Dr. West could have a future together. But each time she tried to bring up the possibility of something more, Dr. West would pull back, reminding her that their relationship could never go beyond the confines of secrecy. His refusal to leave his wife, his repeated reassurances that it was a temporary fling, only fueled Emily's sense of betrayal. On the evening of the murder, Emily was at her breaking point. She had spent weeks trying to get Dr. West to commit to her, to acknowledge that their affair meant something beyond just stolen moments between professor and student. But every time she brought it up, Dr. West dismissed it, claiming that it was impossible for him to leave his family. He told her it was a mistake, one that couldn't be undone, and that they needed to stop. Emily felt cornered, unable to accept the reality that their relationship would never evolve into something real. As much as she tried to hold on to the hope that Dr. West would change his mind, She knew deep down that he was never going to choose her over his family. The more he pushed her away, the more desperate she became. She felt trapped, as if the world she had built around her, the world where Dr. West was the center, was crumbling. That night, she decided to confront him once and for all. She couldn't take it anymore. The lies, the secrecy, the crushing disappointment. She needed answers, and she needed them now. Emily had no intention of leaving without getting a definitive answer about their future. She told herself that this would be the last time they would speak about it. One way or another, she would get closure. When Emily arrived at Dr. West's home, it was late and the house was quiet. His wife, Sarah, and their 2 children were out of town for the weekend, which only made the situation more dangerous. She had known that Dr. West would be alone, and it made her feel that much more empowered. She rang the doorbell, her heart pounding in her chest. Dr. West opened the door, surprised to see her standing there. They sat in the living room, and for a moment the conversation seemed almost normal. They spoke about her thesis, about law school, but beneath the surface the tension was unbearable. Emily could feel the weight of the unspoken words between them. Her mind raced as she prepared to ask him the question she had been rehearsing for days. But before she could speak, Dr. West cut her off, telling her once again that it was over. He reiterated that they could never be together, that he couldn't leave his wife. He said everything he had said before, but this time it was different. His tone was final. The finality in his voice shattered Emily's fragile composure. In a moment of blind rage, Emily stood up. Her hands shook, but she couldn't control the fury that bubbled up inside her. She needed to end it. End the constant heartache, the constant feeling of being rejected. Her thoughts became a blur, and before she realized what was happening, she had grabbed a knife from the kitchen. The decision felt almost instinctual. Her hand wrapped around the handle, and she lunged at him. The first strike was swift, and Dr. West barely had time to react. He staggered back, his eyes wide with shock and confusion, but the rage inside Emily was too powerful to stop. The knife slipped from her hand as he fell to the floor, his blood spilling onto the carpet. She stood there, frozen, watching him as his life slipped away. The horror of what she had done began to seep in, but it was too late. The reality of the situation hit her all at once, but she couldn't undo it. She had crossed a line, and there was no going back. Emily called the police herself. She didn't run. She didn't try to hide what she had done. In a daze, she confessed, her voice shaking with disbelief. She had killed him. She had murdered the man she thought she loved. The weight of her actions began to settle in as she waited for the police to arrive, knowing that nothing would ever be the same again. The affair had led them to this, an irreversible moment that would haunt her for the rest of her life. The truth was out, and there would be no turning back. The aftermath of the murder was swift and relentless, a storm that swept through the university and tore apart everything Emily had once known. When the police arrived at Dr. West's home, they found him dead, his body lying in a pool of blood. Emily, still in a daze, was waiting for them. She didn't try to flee or deny what had happened. Instead, she calmly told them everything: the affair, the argument, and the fatal act that had followed. Her confession was chilling in its simplicity. She hadn't meant to kill him, but in her mind it felt like the only way to end the emotional torment she had endured for months. At first, the university community couldn't believe what had happened. Dr. West had been a respected professor, admired by many for his intellect and charisma. Emily, on the other hand, had been a star student, the kind of person who seemed destined for greatness. No one could fathom that these two individuals, seemingly so perfect in their respective worlds, could be involved in such a tragic and violent situation. The rumors quickly spread, and the media descended on the campus, eager to dig into every detail of the affair, the murder, and the lives of everyone involved. Emily was arrested and charged with murder, but the case wasn't as clear-cut as it appeared. Her confession, while undeniably direct, raised more questions than answers. Was this a crime of passion, fueled by jealousy and betrayal, or was there something deeper at play, an emotional breakdown that had led to a moment of uncontrollable violence? Emily's mental state was scrutinized in the weeks following her arrest. She had always been a high achiever, driven and focused, but her sudden descent into obsession and rage painted a different picture. The pressure of keeping the affair a secret, the fear of rejection, and the overwhelming desire for Dr. West to choose her had all culminated in that fateful night. The public reaction was divided. Some saw Emily as a victim, a young woman manipulated by a powerful professor, a woman pushed to the brink by a relationship that had been kept hidden from the world. Others viewed her as a cold-blooded killer, someone who had let her emotions spiral out of control, resulting in the loss of a man's life. Emily's defense team argued that she had acted in the heat of the moment, overcome by the pain of unrequited love and the crushing weight of betrayal. But her prosecution painted a different picture, suggesting that Emily had premeditated the murder, planning it out over days or weeks before finally taking action. Meanwhile, Dr. West's family was left to pick up the pieces of their shattered lives. His wife, Sarah, was devastated by the loss of her husband, but the discovery of the affair only added another layer of trauma. She had known something was wrong, but she had never imagined it would lead to murder. The public humiliation, combined with the grief of losing her partner, was almost too much for her to bear. She became a silent figure in the aftermath, grieving in private, while the world turned its gaze toward her family's tragedy. As the legal proceedings continued, Emily found herself facing a reality that was far harsher than she had ever imagined. She had destroyed not only her own future but also the lives of those around her. The affair that had once seemed so thrilling and forbidden now stood as the catalyst for everything that had gone wrong. Dr. West's death left a void that could never be filled, and Emily's life, once full of potential, seemed to crumble before her eyes. She would never again be the person she had been, innocent, driven, and full of dreams. The weight of what she had done would follow her for the rest of her life, no matter how the legal system decided to judge her. The case eventually went to trial, but by then the damage had already been done. Emily's name would forever be associated with the murder of a beloved professor, and the university community would never be the same. What had started as a forbidden affair between a brilliant student and a charismatic professor had spiraled into a tragedy that left no one unscathed. The lies, the betrayals, and the murder would haunt everyone involved for years to come, a constant reminder of how far obsession and secrecy could push someone to the edge. The trial was a media frenzy. The world seemed obsessed with the tragedy that had unfolded at the prestigious university, dissecting every detail of Emily's life and the affair that had led to Dr. West's death. Throughout the proceedings, Emily remained a shell of the person she had once been. The once promising student who had captured everyone's attention for her brilliance and potential was now the accused murderer, and the weight of her actions seemed to hang over her like a dark cloud. Her defense team argued that Emily had been emotionally unstable, overwhelmed by the pressures of her relationship with Dr. West, and unable to process the rejection she had faced when he told her it was over. The prosecution painted a different picture, suggesting that Emily's actions were premeditated, that she had planned the murder for days, driven by obsession and a thirst for control. The public was divided, with some sympathizing with Emily's emotional turmoil, while others viewed her as a calculating killer. As the trial dragged on, the truth became even more difficult to grasp. Emily's guilt was undeniable, but the question of whether her actions had been the result of an impulsive breakdown or a planned crime remained open for interpretation. In the end, the jury delivered its verdict: guilty of manslaughter, but not first-degree murder. The charge of premeditation was dropped, but the emotional toll of the crime was clear. Emily was sentenced to 15 years in prison, a sentence that would feel like a lifetime given her once-promoting future. After the verdict was delivered, Emily was led away in handcuffs, her face a mask of numbness. She didn't look at the press, didn't seek the attention that had once been a part of her life. Her world had collapsed, and she now faced the grim reality of life behind bars. As she served her sentence, Emily was left to confront the consequences of her actions. She would never again be the person she had dreamed of becoming. Her relationship with Dr. West had cost her everything: the life she had imagined, the friendships she had built, and her place in the world. In prison, she was forced to reckon with her decisions and the irreversible damage they had caused. The affair had begun as something forbidden and exciting, but it had ultimately led to a loss that no amount of time could ever undo. And in the end, that was the most haunting consequence of all.